We all have a deep need to feel in control, which is why we try to shape the people and situations around us to fit our expectations and preferences. But this is an exercise in futility that only makes us frustrated and anxious and sets us up for conflict with the people in our lives. In the Let Them Theory, 2024, Mel Robbins contends that we need to shift our mindset so we can stop wasting energy trying to control other people's thoughts, feelings, and actions. She writes that the best way to keep other people from sapping your energy is to let them be who they are, while focusing on what you can control, yourself and your own responses. Robbins explains that this simple shift frees you from the draining cycle of trying to manage what other people think and do. Instead, by accepting reality as it is and detaching from others' choices, you can take full responsibility for your life and happiness. When you acknowledge the truth that you can't change others, only yourself, you can stop trying to derive your sense of agency and control from your influence on others, and instead find greater peace, confidence, and self-determination by focusing on your own thoughts and actions. Robbins is an author, speaker, and podcast host known for developing a method she calls the 5-second rule, counting down from 5 to 1 and taking action when you get to 1. The Let Them theory grew out of a viral Instagram video where Robbins explained the basic premise of her theory that we should stop wasting our time and energy on trying to get people to live up to our expectations. In this guide, we'll walk through Robbins's theory, examining what radical acceptance is, why it works, and how you can integrate her let them and let me methods into your daily life. We'll also explore the neuroscience behind our need for control, how friendship affects our brain chemistry, and why our attempts to change others often backfire. New section. What is the Let Them theory? Robbins's Let Them theory teaches us to detach from situations and behaviors that are outside our sphere of influence. It involves shifting your mindset to take control of what you do and how you spend your time and energy. She explains that we have a natural need to feel like we're in control because we fear that things will go wrong if we aren't in control, and we think that if we can just influence those around us, we'll find a way to make our lives better and avert potential problems. But we can't control other people's actions or opinions, and trying to do so just makes us more stressed, anxious, miserable, and drained. It saps our energy, robs us of our peace of mind, and distracts us from creating the lives we want. How we're wired to seek control. Neuroscience research suggests our desire for control is biologically hardwired, not just culturally learned. Researchers have found that believing we can control our environment, and attempting to, is not merely preferable. It's a psychological and biological imperative for survival. Our brain's reward system reinforces this drive for control. When we make choices, even inconsequential ones, we activate a network of brain regions that produces rewarding feelings. The biological need for control explains why people prefer situations offering choice over non-choice ones, even when the outcomes are identical. The removal of control, meanwhile, triggers significant stress responses. This suggests that when we try to control others, we're attempting to satisfy a fundamental biological drive. The anxiety we feel when we can't control others isn't just psychological discomfort. It's our brain's ancient warning system telling us our survival might be threatened. To escape the trap of trying to control what other people do and say, Robbins contends you have to acknowledge that you can't manage everyone else's opinions, judgments, and feelings, and redirect your energy and focus to what you can control. She explains that to do that, you can use 2 simple phrases: let them and let me. Let them and let me. When you say let them, you consciously detach from other people's behaviors, opinions, and emotional reactions. This frees you from wasting time and energy on things you can't control or wishing you could change the people around you, people who might not actually want to change. Robbins says that saying let them saves you time and energy and might make you feel relieved, but she cautions that it might also make you feel superior because you can blame the other person for their bad behavior or wrong opinions and move on. It can also lead you to withdraw from the situation and from your connection with others. This is where let me comes in. Let me means you take responsibility for your own actions, thoughts, and feelings in response to the situation. Robbins explains that when you say let me, you empower yourself to focus on your values, your attitude, and your actions as you move forward. By combining let them with let me, you regain control of the situation and give grace to others. For example, when a family member offers unsolicited advice about your life choices, you can let them have their opinion without internalizing it. After all, their perspective isn't a reflection of your values or the validity of your decisions. Then, you can remind yourself to let me decide how to move forward, given the values and goals you've defined for yourself. Short-form note: Robbins's approach parallels acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, a framework to help people embrace difficult thoughts and feelings while acting in ways aligned with their core values. The idea is that accepting your emotions, rather than fighting them, helps you move beyond them more effectively, much as Robbins advocates accepting that others will think, feel, and act in ways you can't control. Russ Harris, The Happiness Trap, notes that acceptance isn't the end goal. It just helps you to take committed action based on your deepest values. Both ACT and the let them theory can help you develop psychological flexibility, the ability to be in the present moment while acting in ways that serve your values. Robbins explains that practicing let them and let me doesn't require you to give up on improving a situation or to let go of your feelings. Her method just gives you a way to free yourself from your natural tendency to try to control what you can't control. She contends that the key to making your relationships healthier and your life happier is to use your own goals, priorities, values, and feelings, rather than what others say and think, to determine what you should do and how you should do it. Short-form note: in Let Your Life Speak, Parker J. Palmer writes that to discover your vocation and your values, you have to listen to your inner voice and overcome the temptation to conform to external expectations. Writers from Palmer to Henry David Thoreau, Walden, have noted that we often repeat what we've heard other people say instead of reflecting on our own authentic priorities. To discover your authentic values, Palmer suggests you must pay attention not only to the parts of yourself that you like, but also the ones that you aren't so proud of. It's only by seeing your whole self, including your limitations, that you can see a complete picture of who you are and what's most important to you. Robbins explains that as you integrate the let them theory into your daily life, you'll reduce your stress levels and increase your sense of empowerment to build the life that you want. Situations that once made you feel frustrated or anxious will become opportunities to exercise your newfound ability to let go of what you can't control and direct your energy toward more constructive pursuits. While let them involves accepting others for who they are, let me requires taking full responsibility for your own life. It's about recognizing that you are the only one who can create the changes you want. Why do we think we can control other people? Neuroscience is just beginning to explain our persistent but erroneous belief that we can control other people. Researchers have found that our brains engage in forward thinking, or planning multiple steps ahead, when we try to influence others, much like a chess player anticipating their opponent's moves. In one study, participants played bargaining games while researchers observed their brain activity. Even when the participants had no control over outcomes, they still reported feeling they had significant influence over their partner's decisions in situations where they actually had none. This illusion of control appears to be driven by a region of the brain called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, VMPFC, a decision-making center that's involved in planning. When we interact with others, this brain region automatically calculates potential outcomes of our actions. This creates the sense that we're in control of the situation, even when we're not. This neurological predisposition explains why Robbins's advice to let them feels so counterintuitive. We're literally fighting our brain's default settings. The stress, anxiety, and energy depletion Robbins describes as effects of trying to control others may even be the effect of our brains working overtime to calculate influence strategies that can never succeed. New section. Why do let them and let me work? Robbins points out that our time and energy are precious resources that we need to invest wisely. When we allow external factors to drain us emotionally and mentally, we deplete the reserves we need to work toward our goals, deepen our relationships, and improve our well-being. Stress and negative emotions are a natural consequence of letting other people deplete our time and energy, and these can have detrimental effects on our physical and mental health, with results like burnout, anxiety, and depression. Robbins contends that if you protect your energy with the let them theory, you can carve out the space for a more positive, productive, and fulfilling life. She also explains that when you stop trying to influence what other people say and do, you not only regain precious time and energy, but you learn to protect your emotional well-being too. When you let go of the need to control others, you free yourself from the frustration and emotional upheaval that comes with trying to manage situations beyond your influence. This newfound peace of mind allows you to approach life with greater clarity and intention, and to better see situations and relationships for what they really are. Short form note: the impulse to control other people and deplete our psychological reserves while doing so can manifest in a surprising way. People-pleasing. According to Haley McGee, Stop People-Pleasing, people pleasers don't seem controlling on the surface. They appear accommodating and selfless, but their behavior stems from trying to control how others perceive them. They expend tremendous energy trying to manage others' perceptions, emotions, and reactions, while neglecting what they actually can control: their own boundaries and actions. Many of us drain our mental reserves by trying to make others like us, respect us, or treat us well, when we'd be better served by defining and honoring our own boundaries. Underlying the let them theory is the idea that you have to accept reality as it is, without judging it, without resisting it, and without wanting to change it into something that it's not. Robbins characterizes the theory as a way to apply ideas promoted by Stoicism, Buddhism, detachment theory, and radical acceptance. Stoicism teaches us to focus on what we think and do, rather than fixating on the thoughts and actions of others. Buddhism and radical acceptance explain that we make ourselves miserable by wishing that reality were different and trying to change it. Detachment theory teaches that to avoid being miserable and anxious about things that are outside our control, we have to step back and emotionally distance ourselves. Short form note: the classic novel The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger illustrates the struggle to accept reality as it is. Holden Caulfield is disillusioned by the selfishness he sees in the adult world, where many people are phony and self-interested. Modern readers can still relate to Holden's journey from adolescence to adulthood, and the disillusionment that comes with realizing the flaws of the world. Holden struggles to accept the world as it is, rather than clinging to his idealized fantasies or attempting to escape reality. But he does find moments of beauty and authenticity in other people, and these provide respite from the ugliness of the world and help him come to terms with the world as it is, rather than as how he wishes it could be. The ancient wisdom of accepting reality. The let them theory draws on a range of philosophical and psychological traditions that have each recognized the value of accepting reality as it is. Despite their different origins, each converges on the same insight. The path to emotional freedom requires distinguishing between what we can and can't change, and checking our impulse to resist what lies beyond our control. Stoicism, a school of philosophy founded in Athens around 300 BCE, teaches that emotional suffering comes from our judgments about events, not the events themselves, as Ryan Holiday explains in The Obstacle is the Way. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus wrote, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." Stoics differentiate events according to what they called the dichotomy of control: things within our control, primarily our own thoughts and actions, and things outside our control, including others' behaviors and external circumstances. The Stoic ideal is to focus exclusively on what we can control while practicing indifference toward what we cannot. Buddhism, a 2,500-year-old Eastern philosophical tradition, identifies attachment and craving as the root causes of suffering, dukkha. The Buddha's Four Noble Truths establish that suffering arises from resisting the impermanent nature of reality and desiring things to be different than they are. Buddhist mindfulness practices encourage non-judgmental awareness of the present moment, developing what's called upekkha, equanimity, the ability to observe reality without being carried away by reactions to it. Detachment theory in psychology describes the process of emotionally distancing yourself from situations to gain a healthier perspective and reduce your emotional reactivity. Unlike disassociation, healthy detachment involves maintaining awareness while creating space between oneself and triggering circumstances. Detachment is the ability to care deeply about other people, but not be controlled by others' moods or behavior. Radical acceptance, a concept popularized by psychologist Marsha Linehan in dialectical behavior therapy, involves fully accepting reality without resistance, even when it's painful. As Tara Brach explains in Radical Acceptance, this doesn't mean you approve of what's happening or that you don't want things to change. Instead, it means that you understand and acknowledge what's happening without letting yourself be ruled by it. By stopping yourself from struggling against unchangeable circumstances, you free up the energy to respond intentionally and effectively rather than react emotionally. New section. How can you use the let them theory? Robbins contends that the let them theory can be applied to all areas of your life, from work to friendships to romantic relationships. At its core, conserving your energy and protecting your peace with the let them theory is a two-step process. 1. Recognize and acknowledge situations or behaviors that are outside your control. In these moments, when you notice you're reacting negatively to someone's choices, consciously say, let them to yourself, signaling your detachment from judging them and letting go of your need to change, control, or criticize them. 2. Shift your focus to what you can control, your thoughts, actions, and responses. Reflect on how you want to think, act, and speak, and how you can align your next steps with your core values. Say let me and take a deep breath, resetting your body's stress response, and reclaim your responsibility to act positively. Sailing against the wind. The let them theory has a parallel in sailing, an activity where success depends entirely on working with forces you cannot control. Sailors understand a fundamental truth: you cannot sail directly against the wind. Attempting to do so leaves you stalled and frustrated, just as trying to change other people's behaviors leaves you drained and ineffective. Instead, skilled sailors use a technique called tacking, where they zigzag at strategic angles to the wind, making forward progress through indirect routes. This strategy perfectly illustrates Robbins's approach to navigating the headwinds of your relationships with other people. When sailors encounter a headwind, they first assess its direction and strength, similar to Robbins's let them step, where you acknowledge reality as it exists. Then, rather than fighting the wind directly, sailors adjust their sails and direction to harness that same force to move forward, just as the let me step redirects your energy toward productive action within your control. The physics behind this approach is revealing. A sail works by creating pressure differences that generate forward movement, but only when properly positioned relative to the wind. Similarly, our efforts in life generate momentum only when we stop fighting unchangeable realities and instead position ourselves strategically in relation to them. Skilled sailors don't waste energy cursing the wind's direction, they simply adjust their course and sails. Robbins explains that you can use the let them theory to manage the stress of your everyday life more productively. When you're feeling annoyed and stressed by your friends' constantly changing plans, your colleague's difficulty meeting a deadline, the crowd at the grocery store, or the person having a loud conversation on the train, that's the perfect time to say, let them. Robbins writes that these stressors automatically activate your brain's stress response, but by stopping and thinking, let them, you can reset this response to signal to your brain that whatever's happening isn't worth getting stressed over. This method helps you take control of how you spend your time and energy. When you remind yourself to let other people manage their actions, you stop yourself from letting their behavior amp up your stress levels and bring down your mood. Then, when you refocus on what you're going to say or do in this situation, you signal to your brain that you can't control the situation you're feeling stressed about, but you can control how you respond. As for figuring out how to respond, Robbins recommends considering whether the incident will bother you in an hour or a week or a year. If it won't, then you might not have to do anything. But if it's really going to bother you, then it's worth putting in the time and effort to address it. How to interrupt the stress response. When Robbins suggests saying let them to reset your stress response, she's tapping into something neuroscientists have been studying for decades: our ability to interrupt the body's automatic stress cascade. Stress triggers a rapid sequence of events in your brain. Your amygdala, a brain region involved in emotional processing, perceives a threat and signals the hypothalamus, which works like a command center and activates your sympathetic nervous system. This releases adrenaline and eventually cortisol into your bloodstream. This fight-or-flight response evolved to help you survive physical dangers. But it gets activated by everyday frustrations too, like that person talking loudly on their phone in public. The let them technique works by engaging your prefrontal cortex, the rational part of your brain responsible for higher-order thinking. When you consciously say, let them, you're activating this region, which can interrupt the amygdala's emotional alarm system. This mental shift helps your parasympathetic nervous system, the brake to your stress response, engage more quickly. Researchers describe getting stuck in the fight-or-flight response as failing to complete the stress cycle. When you use Robbins's method to accept what you can't control and refocus on your own response, you're actually helping your brain complete this cycle by transitioning from stress activation to relief. This also explains why Robbins finds that saying "let them" and "let me" helps people to conserve mental energy. Instead of maintaining the physiologically expensive stress response, which both drains cognitive resources and depletes physical energy, you're allowing your body to return to baseline functioning sooner. This also has the effect of keeping your prefrontal cortex online for more important tasks. Ahead, we'll consider how applying the "let them" theory can help you improve your relationships with others and even with yourself. Take control of your relationships. Saying "let them" and "let me" gives you a way to take responsibility for your relationships. Other people's words and actions can send us on an emotional roller coaster. When we internalize the negative things they say and do, we often feel inferior. For example, if your colleague walks into the office one morning and immediately snaps at you, you'd likely feel you must have done something wrong that justifies their rudeness. But they might just be in a bad mood because their shoelace broke or they missed their train, circumstances that don't involve you. Conversely, as we discussed earlier, it can make you feel superior to just think "let them" and dismiss your colleague's behavior, thinking you're the bigger person who's above such pettiness or judging them for being rude. But that wouldn't be a productive way forward, as it still involves judgment rather than true acceptance. Robbins explains that you're responsible for building the relationships you want with other people. In the situation with your grumpy colleague, that means that you wouldn't respond to their rudeness in kind, but instead look at them with empathy and figure out how you can make their day better. Robbins notes that if you say "let them" without following it up with "let me," then you can end up feeling isolated from others. It's by saying "let me" that you exercise your agency to be the person you want to be. For example, the kind of coworker who speaks to your colleagues with the consideration they deserve. How humans and whales navigate stormy seas. Robbins's advice to not just accept others' behavior, "let them," but to actively choose intentional and empathetic responses, "let me," aligns with neuroscience research on specialized brain cells called spindle neurons or von Economo neurons, VENs. These neurons seem to exist in just a handful of species: humans, great apes, elephants, and whales, all animals known for their complex social behaviors and apparent capacity for empathy. Spindle neurons are uniquely structured for rapid processing of social and emotional information, allowing quick transmission of signals across different brain regions. Scientists have found that these neurons appear in brain areas responsible for social awareness, emotional processing, and what they call sympathetic concern. These are precisely the neural foundations needed for the sophisticated relationship dance Robbins describes. Noticing someone's negative behavior, choosing not to take it personally, and then deciding how to respond constructively. The presence of these neurons in whales, who may have had them for 30 million years, twice as long as humans, suggests that the ability to maintain social bonds through empathetic responses might be a specialized evolutionary adaptation. While most animals react defensively or withdraw when faced with hostility, species with spindle neurons can override this instinct, potentially allowing them to consider, how might I respond in a way that strengthens rather than damages this relationship? When Robbins suggests responding to your colleague's rudeness with empathy rather than defensiveness, she's inviting you to engage these advanced neural pathways, a capacity that appears to be rare in the animal kingdom, but which defines some of Earth's most socially sophisticated species. The same principle applies to friendships, too. Robbins explains you have to create the community you desire by adapting to the evolution of your friendships over time. When friends move away, prioritize new connections, or have less time for you, you need to say "let them" instead of clinging tightly or feeling hurt. At the same time, use "let me" to consider what matters most in adult friendships: proximity, timing, and energy. Proximity refers to physical closeness, which creates opportunities for interaction. Timing involves being at similar life stages. Energy is the effort you put in nurturing the friendship. If these are lacking, you can take action to realign yourself with a friend who seems distant or make new connections. Short form note: Robbins' emphasis on proximity, timing, and energy as key to staying connected as friendships evolve is backed by neuroscience. When we spend time in physical proximity to friends, our brains release oxytocin, which activates reward circuits and strengthens our bond. Timing is important too. When friends experience similar challenges, their brain activity actually synchronizes, so we're literally on the same wavelength with friends in compatible life stages. Finally, the energy we invest in friendships creates a safety net. When facing stressful situations, people with strong social connections show reduced activity in brain regions associated with threat processing, so challenges seem less threatening with support. Robbins notes that you can take the same approach to romantic relationships as well. When you're dating someone, you have to let them show you who they really are, what they want in life, and whether you're a priority to them. If they're not the kind of person you want to be with, then you can let the relationship go to make space for someone else who can offer the love, commitment, and compatibility you deserve. No relationship is perfect, and every relationship hits rough patches. But if you agree on your values and support each other's dreams, are willing to put in the effort to make the relationship work, and can accept each other as you are, then you can love them for who they are rather than for who you wish they could be. Short form note: Robbins' advice to let other people show you who they are echoes writer and poet Maya Angelou's wisdom. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. People reveal their authentic selves through consistent patterns of action, but we resist seeing them as they are because we're invested in seeing the potential in romantic partners. This tendency to ignore what people are showing us often stems from what psychologists call optimism bias, our tendency to overestimate the likelihood of positive outcomes despite evidence to the contrary. It's why we overlook red flags, excuse behavior that conflicts with our values, and convince ourselves people will make an exception to established patterns. Stop being stressed out by other people's opinions. The let them theory also works when it's what other people think and say, rather than what they do, that stresses you out. Inevitably, people will have and express negative opinions about you, but if you let their opinions influence your decisions, then you give up control over what you do with your life. Robbins points out that just as we can't change what thoughts pop into our own heads, it's impossible to control what other people think. She recommends expecting that other people will think negative thoughts about you and resolving to follow your own path anyway. Instead of letting your fear of other people's negative opinions constrain you, you can make decisions you're proud of and live according to your own values. Short form note: Robbins' advice to avoid stress over others' opinions aligns with research on how malleable human opinions actually are. Studies reveal that people's opinions change far more often than they realize. Thanks to the protection of our psychological immune system, we unconsciously adjust our opinions to make peace with circumstances we can't change. We even revise our memories to align with our new beliefs, like smokers who remembered doing less public smoking than they'd previously reported after a ban was implemented. This means the opinions that cause you stress today may naturally shift tomorrow, making your efforts to manage those perceptions largely wasted energy. Navigating other people's opinions can be especially difficult when those other people are your family, since they're with you for the long haul. Robbins explains that it's important to think about why someone might have the opinion they do of you or your choices. That way you can see things from their point of view, not so you can change their mind. You probably won't. Rather, it's so you can respect their perspectives, which were formed by their life experiences, and accept them as their imperfect and perhaps judgmental selves. This serves to deepen your relationship. 5 ways to handle judgmental family members. When dealing with family members who express negative opinions about your choices, communication experts recommend using these practical strategies. 1. Use boundary-setting I statements. Rather than defending your choices, simply state your position with phrases like, "I want to focus on other priorities right now," or, "It's important to me to take the time I need." These statements are harder to argue with because they're about your preferences, not debatable facts. 2. Deploy a strategic thank you. When unsolicited advice comes your way, a firm thank you serves as both polite acknowledgement and a signal that the conversation should turn to a different topic. You can say, "I appreciate your advice. Thank you. to signal that you've heard their opinion while still ending the discussion. 3. Redirect the conversation. Take control by changing the subject, especially to something your opinionated relative enjoys discussing. This technique respects their desire to engage with you while shifting away from judgments about you and your choices. 4. Enlist an ally. Before family gatherings, arrange with an understanding relative to help redirect conversations when judgment arises. For example, when your judgmental aunt starts criticizing your career choices, your ally can smoothly introduce a new topic. 5. Create physical distance. Sometimes the most effective response is simply removing yourself from the interaction. Take a break in another room, help in the kitchen, or spend time with more supportive family members. Let go of your fear of other people's emotional reactions. In the same way that managing other people's negative opinions isn't your responsibility, it's also not your responsibility to manage other people's emotional reactions. When you make decisions to avoid disappointing someone, to keep someone from getting angry at you, or because you know they'll make you feel guilty if you don't, you're letting other people's emotions dictate your decisions. Robbins explains that it's hard but necessary to set boundaries and let them react. In doing so, you give people space to feel their emotions, and you release yourself from feeling like you have to manage or fix those emotions for them. She explains that most people have the emotional maturity of an 8-year-old. They've never learned to process their emotions and communicate their needs in a healthy way, because many parents inadvertently teach their children to suppress their emotions instead of finding a healthy way to express them. But Robbins explains that when an adult wants to act like an 8-year-old, you should just let them. Then, when you remind yourself to let me decide how to respond, you realize that their emotions aren't yours to manage, and it's up to you to choose how much time and energy you want to give them. Are you emotionally smarter than an 8-year-old? Psychologists say emotional maturity isn't tied strictly to age, but develops through a combination of neurological development, experience, and intentional practice. While the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for emotional regulation and impulse control, continues developing until approximately age 25, emotional maturity continues evolving throughout adulthood. Researchers say it consists of characteristics like taking responsibility for your actions, showing empathy, owning mistakes, communicating needs clearly, and setting healthy boundaries. But research does support Robbins's core insight that many adults struggle with regulating and managing their own emotions. While an 8-year-old typically can identify basic emotions and is developing self-regulation strategies, many adults still resort to emotional reactions that bypass rational processing, particularly under stress. This happens because emotionally triggering situations can activate our amygdala, the brain's threat detection system, before our prefrontal cortex can engage. But emotional regulation is a skill set that can be continuously developed. Robbins's advice to let them experience their emotions while you choose your response aligns with models like dialectical behavior therapy, which teaches distinguishing between feeling an emotion and acting on it, a skill that supports both emotional maturity and healthy relationships. Robbins points out that sometimes we're the ones who are being emotionally immature. The let them theory not only helps you feel more compassionate with people who have trouble managing their emotional reactions, but can also help you be more compassionate with yourself and your emotions. When you notice yourself getting angry or feeling frustrated, you can use let them to tell yourself to let those emotions wash over you. Then, you can use let me to remind yourself that you don't have to react to the emotions you feel. You can't control how you feel, but you can control what you say and do. You shouldn't let your emotions dictate your decisions any more than you should let other people's emotions determine what you do. Shedding emotional baggage. Wes Anderson's 2007 film The Darjeeling Limited dramatizes what happens when emotionally immature people have to replace their ineffective coping mechanisms with real efforts to manage their own emotions. The film follows 3 brothers on a spiritual journey across India after their father's death, each attempting to manage his grief and pain in counterproductive ways. Francis tries to control every aspect of their trip, Peter hoards their father's possessions, and Jack sidesteps emotions by turning them into thinly veiled fiction. The brothers initially practice a stunted version of let them. They physically distance themselves from problems, but they haven't accepted reality. They break through this emotional immaturity only when they're forced to confront genuine tragedy outside their bubble of self-concern, culminating in the film's most powerful visual metaphor, the brothers literally abandoning their father's monogrammed baggage as they run to catch a train. The moment illustrates the shift from merely saying "let them" to embracing "let me," taking responsibility for how they respond to their circumstances without being weighed down by past hurts or letting their pain prevent them from being present in the moment. Stop pressuring other people to change. If you've ever tried to push somebody else to change, then you know it almost never works. Instead, you have to create an environment of acceptance and love to enable people to make changes in their own time. We all have a fundamental need for autonomy and control over our lives, and we naturally resist attempts by others to force change because these attempts threaten this core need. However, when we feel fully accepted and loved unconditionally, we're free to look inward and find our own motivation to grow. Robbins recommends several steps to create this supportive environment. Practice radical acceptance of others without judgment. Express unconditional love while separating who they are from behaviors you dislike. Be patient as change happens naturally. Celebrate positive steps and provide resources only when asked. By modeling the positive changes you'd like to see rather than criticizing or controlling, you allow them space to decide for themselves that they want to change. The goal isn't to enable self-destructive behavior, but to provide the emotional safety that makes meaningful change possible. Paradoxically, when people feel truly accepted as they are, they become more willing and able to transform themselves. Short-form note: in Love Undetectable, Andrew Sullivan explores the contrasting dynamics of control in different types of relationships. While romantic relationships often involve surrendering control to another person, making ourselves vulnerable by placing our emotional well-being partially in their hands, friendships are different. Where romance might tempt us to merge identities or influence our partner's choices, friendship thrives specifically because we respect the other person's autonomy and separate life path. Both Sullivan and Robbins recognize that true connection emerges not from managing others' behaviors, but from creating space where both people can exercise their freedom while choosing to remain in each other's lives. The boomerang effect: why pushing for change also pushes people away. Robbins's advice to stop pressuring others to change is supported by psychological research in a phenomenon known as the boomerang effect. When we try to force someone to change, they often respond by doubling down on their original behavior, like a boomerang that flies in the opposite direction of your throw before circling back to hit you in the face. This resistance to persuasion is deeply rooted in our psychological need for autonomy. Social psychologists have documented countless examples. Putting up stern signs saying "do not write on this wall" actually increases graffiti compared to gentler requests. Similarly, when Romeo and Juliet, the protagonists of one of Shakespeare's most beloved plays, were forbidden to be together, their love intensified rather than diminished. Hence, social psychologists' nickname for this phenomenon, the Romeo and Juliet effect. The boomerang effect explains why your well-intentioned efforts to get your partner to exercise, convince your friend to quit smoking, or push your sibling to change careers often backfire. The moment someone feels their freedom of choice is threatened, they instinctively resist to regain control. Robbins's approach of creating an environment of acceptance circumvents this psychological trap. By removing pressure and judgment, you eliminate the trigger for defensive resistance. This doesn't mean enabling harmful behavior. It means recognizing that sustainable change can only come from within. By practicing radical acceptance, you're not abandoning your hope for change. You're actually creating the psychological safety that makes change possible. The person who feels completely accepted paradoxically becomes free to consider changing without the defensive barriers that pressure creates. Build a healthier relationship with yourself. Finally, Robbins explains that you can use the "let them" theory to improve the relationship you have with yourself. She notes that you are the only person that you're guaranteed to spend the rest of your life with, and you owe it to yourself to make your happiness and dreams a priority. When you let other people do what they want to do and resolve to not allow them to determine what you do, you decide to build the life you want without worrying about other people's approval or validation. Robbins notes you can use "let them" and "let me" to give yourself the power to become your own source of happiness, to define what's important to you, and to take control of how you work to turn your reality into the life you want. The limits of self-help in an unequal world. Robbins's advice to become your own source of happiness through the let them theory offers powerful psychological tools for individual empowerment. Yet it raises an important question that haunts all self-help literature. How much control do we truly have over our well-being when structural barriers stand in our way? Research reveals a sobering reality. While psychological techniques can help individuals cope with difficult circumstances, they can't overcome fundamental inequities. A study found that nearly 90% of people with household incomes over $100,000 describe themselves as flourishing, compared to less than half of those earning under $30,000. Similarly, more white participants reported flourishing than black participants, regardless of their mindset or psychological practices. This doesn't invalidate Robbins's approach, but places it in necessary context. The ability to let go of others' opinions and focus on your values presupposes certain conditions, like not having to worry about food security, housing stability, or systemic discrimination. Robbins's framework might work best when combined with an understanding that flourishing requires both individual agency and structural support. Let them and let me can be transformative tools for reclaiming personal power, especially in interpersonal relationships. But the most complete approach to well-being acknowledges both our personal responsibility for growth and the societal conditions that make that growth possible.